Now we jump ahead to Melville, The Human Condition, The Existential Man. This is one of the most influential films in film history, whether people working today know it or not, because it's influenced them through all of the imitation.
Welcome, everyone, back to another iteration of Let's Take 5, the podcast where you take a cinema legend and discuss their excellence and range. My name is Eric Martindale.
My name's Austin Luger.
And today I am Skyping again, as you can probably hear, as we're doing because it's freezing in Chicago, and I didn't want to go to Austin because it's too cold.
And the roads are terrible.
And the roads are terrible. So that's what's happening right now, which you kind of expect in the winter in Chicago. But today we are covering Leon Morin Priest as we continue our Jean-Pierre Melville 5. The previous film we covered was Bob Le Flambeur. The film after this will cover the immortal classic Les Samourai, then Army of Shadows, then Les Cercle Rogue, or Cercle Rogue. We're going to butcher these, I'm not French. But today, Leon Morin Priest, the second film in our 5, is a very, what's the word I want to use? I don't know. We'll talk. The more we talk about it, the more I'll probably be able to come up with that word. But it's a film about a priest who ends up falling into a role of sort of a life advisor, spiritual advisor for an atheist French woman living in France during World War II. And we'll just go with that because that's what it is, basically conversations with your priest, with a priest. And the first thing that struck me about this film, other than how incredibly handsome the priest is, I don't mind saying, I'm confident enough to say that, is that it is one of the very few examples, and this may be just the modern times we live in, modern culture, whatever it is. It's a very rare example of a priest that's actually good. He's a good priest.
It's true. This is not a prequel to Spotlight or Doubt or anything. This is essentially, like, I saw this movie and was blown away when I first watched it because it's exactly the kind of back and forth you want to have about religion, where no one is really condescending. And it's a really kind of it's almost a debate movie, but the debate is God, and you know I'm for all that talky crap, and this is like the talkiest of talky crap, and I loved it.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is kind of a debate film, at least initially. I mean, the film essentially works this way: the main character, whose name is Barney, right?
Yes.
She goes to she goes into confession booth to basically get into an altercation with a priest. That's her intent. She goes into the confession booth, and as soon as the confession starts, she says basically, "I don't believe in God, and you're a fraud." And he says, "Oh, really? Well, let's talk about that." And from there, a relationship, a friendship sort of starts to forge first, coming out of these conversations about religion and about God and about what God means to her, what God means to him. But the needle moves on it. I mean, it is a debate film, but it doesn't keep sort of this idea of, okay, this is the secular world versus the spiritual world, or this is like, it's going to keep, this is what you're going to have is you're going to have this ultimate like agnostic or atheist view of religion, and you're going to have this one religion of monotheistic and, Christendom type version, because the needle moves towards God, which is also rare too, because by the end of the film, the character Barney is a Catholic, a practicing Catholic by the end of the film.
Yes. Not in a straight line, though, which is what I thought was interesting, because basically there's a point where she goes, "All right, I'm Catholic now." And it's like, no. You. It's not that you have to earn it. It's more of like, you have to be doing it for the right reasons. And
right.
The reasons then was jealousy or convenience. And this was just a really kind of bold move of... Because it's such a violent setting, this movie, right? Like, this could have been a play where it's just the conversations, but to see Barney outside of the church shows you just kind of how disjointed the world is, and there is a reason people are longing for faith, community, comfort, understanding, and that is what kind of really makes
and sexuality.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's the character of Barney. She's she's a woman. And she's a single mother. Also, I guess that should be emphasized too. Living in France at the time of the war, there's no men around, and she ends up developing for the first time sexual feelings towards a woman. But it almost seems to happen because there's no other men around, right?
Right.
And Leon Morin, the priest, he's an attractive man. So there's an allure there too that's mostly unspoken for a large portion of the film. In fact, about an hour and a half of it.
But I love that you saw it right away, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, but that's the thing is when I'm watching the film. First of all, I'm expecting him to be a bad priest, just because most priests in film that I have seen are bad, or you think they're good and they end up being bad, or something like that, or they lose their faith, even if they're not bad people. They end up being very, very anti-organized religion. Okay,
right.
And this fellow, who is he is a nonconformist. I mean, he is kind of a rebel of priests, but he's a good man and he's a very, very spiritual man. But he's also roughly the same age. He's one of the only men you ever see in the film, period. Anyway, and he's really, really attractive. And so naturally, the first thing that came to my mind was who's going to corrupt who here, and will a line be crossed sexually? But it went so long until that actually became sort of a point that the film wanted to make that I had almost decided, am I weird? Am I perverted for thinking that?
No, I mean, this movie is about the unsaid sexual tension. I mean, it's definitely more subtle than something like Black Narcissus, which has literal flashes of red on the screen as these nuns become sexually frustrated. This is... It's something understood because, much like the nature of a confessional booth, she goes in not knowing what she's going to see. All she saw was the name on the door. Yeah. And she's expecting the kind of old, wrinkly man. And so right away, the topics that she wants to talk about are the ones that the church has, on a whole, not always been the best at.
Right.
About homosexuality and... I think they quickly bring up the silence of God. I kind of forget where when everything kind of happens in the discussion. But immediately, Leon Morin is kind of preaching an element of tolerance. I mean, he still very much believes in the Word of God, but he doesn't follow a perverted sense of that. Do you know what I mean?
It perverted in the sense of not sexual.
Yeah, perverted in the sense of skewing the Word of God.
Sure. Or using the Word of God to further advance power or stuff for monetary gain, or all these things we associate negatively. We associate particularly with the Catholic Church.
It's kind of funny how that works out because as the film develops and how Barney becomes more infatuated with Leon Morin. As a spiritual provider, but also as a handsome man, there is... I almost feel like the film wants you to root for him to fail, in a way of like...
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I love that, because essentially the meanest thing he does in the movie is not run off with her.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, well, and then that begs the question, because you said the sexual tension between the two of them, and that brings me to a question. I almost feel like, and I'm going to ask you this, do you think Leon was purposely trying to play in or build that tension?
I don't think on purpose.
I don't think so either. So it's almost not really... She's seeing signs that aren't really there, right? Like,
well, there is that he starts to develop a similar relationship with another young woman who they start chatting between conversations, basically saying like, oh yeah, Leon's going to be all these kind of great books, and I can't really understand them, but I think I'm really Catholic now. Yeah. And you just kind of see Barney become really jealous, and that's where she really starts to feel protective of her priest.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, is such an interesting thing, because we really only see Leon Morin. He does speak in front of a congregation, but it's really kind of those two women that he is seeing kind of do the one-on-one talks with, and they are young and beautiful.
Yeah, and there is another young, beautiful woman who's a prostitute who literally is only there to try to seduce him and fails miserably.
Yes.
But she reads into, there's a specific moment where he passes her in church, and he brushes up against her as he walks by, Barney. And she takes that to mean a sexual pass, as much as he can do, or flirting, you know. Which is totally not what it is. So
well, she also, the way they film one of those congregation scenes really is like her thinking like, this is just for me. So we're seeing the whole film from her lens, despite it being called Leon Morin Priest. I find that so interesting, kind of like all that she wants out of it, and how ultimately he will start to kind of represent a bit of that community and, gateway to God that she is looking for, which is essentially what a priest is supposed to do.
Right.
I'm not Catholic, so I can only speculate from films, really. I think I've been to 2 Catholic church services in my life. One was a wedding. So I can't speak entirely about this, but I always find the nature of faith is I believe you are more religious than I am, but it's like faith to me is that's not the right phrase. It's a confidence game, but it's literally a game of confidence, and to have faith means to kind of be willing to blindly accept the impossible and be assured of that in a way that does bring you comfort. Am I making myself clear at all?
Well, you're describing faith.
Yes, and so I always admire those who practice what they literally preach, because it is such a powerful stance to have, I guess. Whenever I see art in a museum that has this religious message towards it, all I can think about is just the hours and hours and hours it took to paint this, and what that artist's relationship with God is, because it's a powerful one-way-ish relationship that is done so smallly here. The film doesn't say that Leon Morin is God, but he is the door to something spiritually richer, which is so interesting.
Well, he's the door. He's the mouthpiece of God. He's a priest. He's the representative of God. And to Barney, it's it's not scary. Hearing it from him and having conversations with Leon about God and those types of things that she's usually kept at a distance, or feel like, just ancient tomes, words and books, or where you had powerful men, speaking this certain way and not having really any sort of bend to them, just very, very rigid in rules and all in constructs, and typically man-made constructs and all these things. And for Leon to be the face of that totally runs contrary to what her expectations were about faith. And also what ends up happening is, rather than getting really skeptical of Leon, she ends up admiring Leon. Even if she can't believe the way she does, in the same way you're sort of describing, she admires his faith. And also admires that he's willing to stand for her lack of faith. But she does move differently. Like I said, the needle does move a little bit, because I feel like there's definitely a point where she says, you've convinced me, I believe in God. But rather than that being some sort of revelation that brings happiness, it almost makes her sad and reticent. It's like, I'm going to go and I'm going to do these things, and I believe in God and I'm not happy about it. It's more like, what do I do now? Okay, fine, I believe in God, so what do I do now? You know what I mean?
I took that as a bit of she has removed all of her logical arguments, I guess, of why she isn't a Catholic or isn't a woman of faith.
Yeah, but why remove them if she didn't think they were defeated?
Well, I think she feels the arguments were defeated, but even though she now has no reason not to believe, I guess in her more logical thought process, the idea of God replacing Leon Morin, who is there in person, I always took it as she didn't see immediately the idea of the abstract comfort when there is someone here who is comforting her through hard times. Does that make sense? They have to stop the sessions.
True, but you mentioned earlier. You said that love. I don't know where that came from. That God, well, maybe God. Many people think those are synonymous, but that God, it's a one-way street. You're having faith or belief and energy placed towards this thing that's a one-way conversation. But to many people, it's not. They do get something out of it. I mean, I think the direct thing you said, the direct quote you said is that something that you don't get anything out of. Mm-hmm. But that's not true.
Right.
Is for these people that do have this faith or something. And I guess where it comes in with Barney here is she is that person that's not getting anything out of it. She's an example of what you're talking about. It's like, okay, fine, I believe in God, but what does that do for me? It doesn't, it doesn't end the war going on outside. It doesn't give me someone to help raise my child with. It doesn't fix the problems with your church. Me believing in God. I don't know. There's a lot going on here. It's a very dense film.
It is, and I've only seen it twice. I feel unprepared for this podcast. But,
well, I've only seen it once.
Oh God, we're doomed. But it's something so. When you talked about the needle being moved, because they had such a great performance by Jean-Paul Belmondo?
Yeah.
I recognize him as the lead in Breathless, and he plays a gangster who's seen too many Humphrey Bogart films. So this is very different. And there's something about his performance where in Breathless, he's someone who is trying to be still and cool, but he's not completely. This, he is actually still and cool, but I always feel like near the last third there is he's now putting up a facade when it was so natural for him earlier.
Well, what changes in that last third is that she says that if you were a Protestant and you were a preacher or a Protestant priest or a Protestant pastor, would you take me as your wife?
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously something like that is going to fundamentally change the relationship.
Because, I have to imagine that Leon, saw there was some tension there, but just kind of ignored it in a way. But once it's said aloud, then it is something different for him, and he is uncomfortable, and I don't know if necessarily he is doubting. He never doubts religion, but maybe he even doubts for a second Catholicism over Protestant. But I'm not an expert on either one of those to know the Venn diagram of it all. What did you think of his performance besides him just being attractive?
He's great. His attractiveness is important. It's
I agree.
Integral. It's integral to the entire role. So when I say it, I'm not saying it as I don't mean any condescension behind it or anything like that. False, but I also don't want to show any false modesty towards him as well. He's a very good-looking man. The part requires that, but what does that mean for a priest? I mean, essentially, how much do your looks really matter? But as far as his performance is concerned, I thought it was great. I thought they both were. I mean, him and Barney, the actress Emmanuelle Riva.
Riva. typo in my notes. She, I didn't realize this until I wrote down this in the notes incorrectly, that she is the woman in the Best Picture nominee from a few years ago, Amour.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, she's been in a couple of outstanding French films, like Hiroshima Mon Amour, but she got an Oscar nomination, and I believe she did die a year or two ago. But she's incredible in Amour.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that. I mean, obviously, I remember the film and I remember being nominated. But man, if she died, she had to have just died.
Yeah.
But you know, yeah. I mean, they're both really really great. I don't know. Here's the thing. You can watch this film and take a lot out of it. I mean, kind of the mystery of the film is kind of trying to solve, you know, when is a sexual connection made between the two, or is it ever made? I mean, these are conversations that Jean-Pierre Melville had to have with these actors. I mean, and they're ultimately maybe you know, those three, you know, I know that Jean-Paul Belmondo is still alive, but Emmanuel Riva, Jean-Pierre Melville, these are things that maybe take to the grave with them, but is there a sexual connection made between both of them? If so, when does that happen? And, you know, Leon Morin gets really, really angry when she propositions him.
Yes.
He gets really angry and storms out, which was a bit... Because she comes on to him, he thinks she's joking, and then she says, no, really. And then he gets really upset and leaves. So I don't know. I don't know if it was ever reciprocated that way at all by him, or he ever saw it that way.
See, I saw it as it was, but it's almost him saying, like, you broke the unsaid thing. Now we can't go back to what we had, and what we had was, honestly, in like his mind, the best it could be for him, because that's what he wants, of this intimacy without the actual physical connection. But,
yeah, I don't know if that's what he wants, though. I think he's just a really good priest. I mean, if the roles were reversed and Leon Morin was a woman and Barty was a man, would you be saying the same thing? I mean,
I don't know.
See, like, I think part of it is we're predisposed towards, first of all, men being more sexually deviant than women, because that's a fact. And that also, you know, she's a beautiful woman. How could he not feel something? You know, how could he not have a moment of weakness? And I think what's so admirable about this is I really don't, me personally, I don't think that ever happened. I think it's shocking that it didn't happen. But I don't know. So I think when he storms out and gets angry, it's because she sinned like that, so openly towards him, and particularly in the matter of trying to corrupt what to him is incorruptible, which is his faith in God.
But he has never been angry at other sins she's talked about.
Yeah, but this one involved him particular. This is saying, I want to be with you. Because once you do that, you've changed the room. You've changed the dynamic. I mean, her sin wasn't wanting to have sex with a guy out of marriage or anything like that. The sin in this specific instance here, because it's labeled in the film, is she tried to corrupt a priest, so a servant of God, and that's a big deal.
But that's the great irony, right? That she actually walked into the church the first time looking to corrupt or humiliate a priest, and to me, this was like almost a moment of like sincere connection.
I don't know. I mean,
the prostitute is trying to corrupt, but like, I feel like it's her. Like,
he knew that. He didn't trust. He didn't trust the prostitute like he had trusted her. I think a friendship had formed, and she crossed a line, and he got upset, left, and then came back as a friend would. I feel like if most people viewed the film and you swap the sexes, people would be more willing to believe what I'm saying.
Yeah,
is all I'm saying, and I think that's what's getting kind of muddled the waters here, which is deliberate. I mean, that's the way we're made to feel, right? Where this film is meant to create some of these debates, but I feel like the character of Leon Morin in the movie, I think, is served by the priest remaining uncorrupted. And by the way, these are huge spoilers. Like, this film is not as good. This film's not as good knowing this.
We've spoiled every movie, so hopefully they've caught on by now.
I know, but this was just like there's no way to talk about this film and not talk about like that, right?
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
But there's so much other nuance in the discussions that they have, and the about religion and about God, about faith, about life, and about the war, and about so many other things that it's kind of reductive to just talk about just the sex part, but that's so important, particularly when we're talking about a priest in a room alone with somebody. Like, that's a hot topic.
Well, let's end on looking at Jean-Pierre Melville, because this was a novel, and he adapted it by himself, typically as a co-writer. He directed this one again, and so this is not that long after he made a number of noir films. I think he kind of not saying exactly used noir tendencies, but he knows exactly the importance of a good frame and good lighting to really say everything.
I got noir vibes through this. The character of Barney, her relationship to the man, the way the camera moves in the hallway stairs leading up to his apartment room seems so noir to me.
I know, but noir is all about how terrible the world is, and that your perception needs to be at a crooked angle, because it's just how noir breathes. It's so interesting to see noir techniques in a more optimistic setting.
Yeah, I mean, other than it's happening during the middle of World War II, but yeah, for sure. No, it's definitely there. I like the depiction of the Americans in this film.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 Americans in this film, and 50% of them are probably a rapist.
Yeah, they have some thoughts about American soldiers coming into wartime.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, sorry.
Well, I think it's time to wrap this up. Unfortunately, this is a bit harder to stream than our other things. I luckily had a Criterion Blu-ray before it went out of print. Hopefully they get that back in print, because I want everyone to see this film. We'd love to hear your thoughts if you have seen this film. You can leave a comment at theartofmore.com. You can email us at letstake5@theartofmore.com. You can follow us on Twitter at the Immortals Pod, which is the Twitter account not only for this show, but for all the shows on the network, which include The Immortals, which yesterday had quite an episode where we reviewed Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is a Kurosawa film we did not cover back on our Kurosawa 5, which was our third ever 5 way back when. We also reviewed the album Autobahn, the Bowie song The Man Who Sold the World, and I watched the British miniseries Brideshead Revisited. Ad Absurdum, the pop culture legal podcast, is also on the network. Today's episode is Inception. Take a listen to that and all of their back catalog, because they are all excellent. Eric, where can we find you?
Constant Diversions, our YouTube channel. You can check me out on there.
Excellent. We'll be back next week with another Jean-Pierre Melville film. This one is most likely his most famous film. It is Les Samourai. And if you haven't seen it, do it. Spoiler, do it. Go see it. Go see the movie. But until then, I'm Austin Luger.
I'm Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Arrêtez-moi. Vous n'en avez pas besoin. Je vous écoute.
J'ai manqué. J'ai dit. Je ne sais pas comment ça s'appelle, ce que j'ai fait.
Vous êtes la branche morte en ce moment. Vous savez ce qu'on leur fait aux branches mortes?
Oui.